It has been said that proactive coaching isn't just about teaching skills before they're needed. It's about building character before it's tested. Let's talk about proactive coaching on today's episode of the Playing with a Purpose podcast. All right, welcome to the Playing with a Purpose podcast, where we explore topics related to the moral development of collegiate athletes and young people as it relates to character, responsibility, and purpose. I'm your host, Matt Barker, and today I'm excited to have a successful coach, public speaker, and director of proactive coaching, Mr. Bruce Brown, with me on today's episode. Bruce, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Matt. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you. And we were mentioning a little bit here before we started the podcast. My research when I did the doctorate program dealt a lot with moral and character development of collegiate athletes. And I came across a lot of your stuff when I was doing research. You've written several books. I think when I was going through and looking before the podcast started here, at least 11. There was at least 11 books that you have written on a lot of things related to moral and character development, coaching, how to effectively motivate your team, teaching character, 7 ways to lead your team. So there's a lot of different things that you've mentioned there. We'll talk a little bit about proactive coaching today, which is what you're the director of and kind of your role within that. But give our listeners a little bit of background information about yourself, experience that you've had as far as coaching, education, family, all that good stuff.
Teacher, coach for over 30 years. In junior high school, which is 7, 8, 9, high school, college, community college. Worked in the NFL as evaluating talent for the NFL draft for 8 years. Kind of a wide variety of things. Coached in my generation, we coached more than one sport, so I pretty much coached all year round. So when I first started, I was coaching football, basketball, baseball, added in volleyball later on, and even badminton at one point. So lots of different opportunities there. I'm married to a coach, a great lady who's really a foundation in our life, and we live on an island up north of Seattle, about halfway between Seattle and Vancouver, BC. We lose power a lot, so all of a sudden I fade out, Matt. It's not anything to do with it other than our internet's bad and our power goes out frequently. So 5 daughters, 7 grandkids, loving what we do, have been involved in this for a long time. Our partner is Rob Miller, who I know you interviewed before. Rob is a special person in our lives, and as we're transitioning this business, Rob is taking more and more of the responsibility.
Well, again, it's great to have you on, and I know we're going to have a great conversation today. And as I mentioned before, you have written several books. I know your Facebook page, Proactive Coaching, if you search there, you can find some more information about the books that Bruce has written, as well as some other great information that they share. I seem to get notifications daily on different quotes and different things that are being shared about character development and team settings and things like that. So
I've written a number of books, but I've also written what we call booklets, which are basically chapters. As we found out, those have worked real well for coaches, because we go speak on a specific topic. They don't have to buy an entire book to get that one chapter. It's also easier for coaches to read, easier for us to get into print, obviously cheaper for coaches to purchase, and that was our goal, is to make the information available to as many people as possible in the coaching profession.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about the background behind how proactive coaching was founded. Was this something that you always kind of had in the back of your mind that you wanted to do, or is something that maybe evolved a little bit the more that you researched and studied it and saw how effective it was with your teams that you wanted to do it? Kind of how did that evolve there?
Matt, I one of the things I try to do with everything is be as intentional as possible with all of our coaching stuff and leave as little as possible a chance. But I got to be honest, it was not my intention at all to start this. It just kind of happened organically. I started getting asked to speak at coaching clinics when I was pretty young. And the reason you get asked to speak at coaching clinics is because your teams have done real well and everybody wants to know your technical secrets, So
right.
That's kind of the way I started speaking. I'm actually a pretty shy person unless I'm actually coaching or teaching. I'm kind of an introvert unless I'm doing something that I have a total passion about. But I started speaking at these clinics, and I was speaking at one down in Northern California in San Francisco enough times that I got to know the people that were running it well enough. I sat down and said, hey, I love talking about the technical parts of the game. I'm always honored to be here. But the truth is, I don't think it's the technical parts of the game why we're being successful. And they said, talk to me and talk to us. And so I did that, how we tried to intentionally incorporate character into our teaching, into our culture, into our athletes' lives. And they said, you start talking on that. And it was like, okay. And it was a huge breakthrough. And at that time, there are only a few people talking on non-X's and O's topics, and most of them were sports psychologists. Ken Ravizza, Tom Tutko, and I love listening to those guys. But it was like if you weren't talking about the technical parts of the game, I'm not sure the coaches would be interested. Well, it really grew, and it grew organically. Like I said, it's been basically word of mouth. The NAI had a program called Champions of Character. Rob Miller was the head of that. He heard me speak somewhere or something, and he came to me and he said, we've got this concept, this branding concept that we want to be. You've got the content. Would you come and join us? So I think it was for 8 years, Rob and I traveled and spoke on college campuses. And it was a wonderful experience.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about some of the places that you've been able to visit. I was talking to you when we were planning to have you come on the podcast, is I really wanted to come to you because it sounds like you live in a very interesting place to live on an island. And I was like, I want to try to get there. It didn't work out where I could get there. I'm glad I was able to get you on, at least online. But tell me about some of the places that you've been, some of the programs that you've worked with. Maybe is there any certain program that maybe was more impactful to you as far as who you were able to serve, and maybe just give me some of those experiences that you've had.
We love everywhere we go, and we're always honored that people were willing to invite us and bring us in to work with athletes and teachers and coaches and parents. Working with the NAI, you land on these beautiful little unknown college campuses, and they were always really thankful that you were there. You got a great welcome and stuff. We've worked with some high profile NFL teams and all that kind of stuff. And that's always fun. Every experience is different. We basically say, what are you trying to accomplish before we get there? And if it's something we can do or we think we can help them with, we're more than happy to go. If it's something that we don't think is in our wheelhouse, we suggest other people. I think the most impressive place I've been is West Point. We've been there 3 times and spoken there, and I'll tell you, there's just something special about that place. And I mean, if you ever have any doubts about our future of our country, go spend 5 days with 4,000 cadets. I mean, you just walk taller, Matt. You just feel different. Just exceptional people doing great things and forming leaders, and just it was exceptional. We've been blessed to follow some really good coaches as they've moved around to different teams too. So that's been fun. We've got a lot of long time relationships with people. We've gone back over and over and over again, and that's been really fun. Rob and I have been able to form a lot of friendships along this path, and that's been huge.
Yeah, so. And it's so important, the work that you're doing. I know just from talking to some of the coaches here at Freed-Hardeman, where I attended NAIA school as well, our baseball coach, who is now our athletic director, had mentioned when I had him on our podcast, he said, when early on in coaching, I was focusing on wins a lot. And he said, and our teams weren't really doing that well. And he said, and it wasn't until we started focusing on how to be better teammates, how to be better people, how to be, character, all those different things. He said, and in turn, we just started winning more. He said, it wasn't really the intention. It was to teach these kids how to be better people. But in turn, it did produce wins. And it's a little bit more than just those X's and O's. And you mentioned this a little bit. You said that when you go around to different departments, each department is going to have different needs and things that they want you to do. So it might not be a one-size-fits-all here for every place that you visit. But what would you say would be the overall goal of just when you go around to these different places and speak about moral and character development, specifically in collegiate athletics? What would be your overall goal if you can get one point across to every place that you go? What would that one point that you'd want to make to them be?
Our ultimate goal is to improve the athletic experience for every stakeholder, all the stakeholders, athletes primarily, coaches, parents, and we try to do that through our character-based publications and presentations. When we go, it's often having something to do with developing a character-based team culture. Very specifically, it is sometimes it's providing a blueprint for team leadership. Sometimes, oftentimes, we were speaking to athletes. It's how to develop tough-minded fearless competitors, those things that we do. And when we work with coaches, the purpose of that is trying to train them not only for excellence, but for significance, the more purposeful reason why they coach and getting it, doing their coaching with intention and purpose. We work on things like the impact of trust, power of your words, two different presentations there. First steps to great teams, which is establishing core covenants, which is the cultural piece. Just the people that are there know their athletes and their coaches better than we do. So before we go, we say, give us as much insight as possible so that we're going to be able to help you as much as possible.
And so when we think about NAIA, maybe emphasizes this a little more than NCAA does, as far as, having a program that's dedicated to specifically character and maybe reinforcing these core values that they want their athletes to adhere to. Maybe not as emphasized as much other places. And you go to a lot of different places, not just NAIA schools. So when you're teaching them and maybe coaching them and working with these coaches, how do you balance focusing on a person's skills versus their character? And I know your experience with coaching, you might have dealt with this a little bit as well. So much now is focused on how many wins do you have, how many losses, coaches losing their jobs because, not winning enough. So how do you work with coaches on having this balance, not just between wins and losses, but developing this character in the process? And maybe how do you mentor these different people you work with on doing that?
Well, first of all, we don't talk about anything that we haven't done, okay, that we haven't lived, that we haven't taught, part of our own coaching experience.
Yeah.
Our entire speaking team is made up of people who have lived this, whether they were former players of mine or they coached with me or we worked together in some way, that I know that they have actually lived this and gone through, okay, how did I really teach this and how did I really make that stick? I mean, we're talking about skills and character. I think they're linked. I think there's a linkage there. One of our beliefs is anything you can do to improve the individual character of an athlete and the collective character of your team gives you a better chance for success in every way, including the scoreboard. I think that's just a belief that we have a series of beliefs that are kind of the foundation of what we do. But these are linked, and what you're trying to do is to say the better your character, probably the better teammate you're going to be, the stronger competitor you're going to be. We also try to link, even in my own coaching, I always tried to link skill stuff to character stuff. So in other words, in coaching basketball, when somebody helps on defense, one of our goals was win your individual battle on the ball, help somebody else when they lose theirs. So the help defense, and instead of talking about that as help defense, that was selflessness.
Mm-hmm.
That's a selfless act. And that's something that good athletes and good people do, is there's a selflessness about them. Here's another thing too about physical skills and character skills, character growth. I'm a physical educator by training, and I'm not a psychologist. I'm not, and I understand the rules of motor learning, how you teach a physical skill. That was ingrained in me when I was an athlete, but also when I was a student in college and learning how to do this. And the way you teach a motor skill, the way you teach somebody to slide to second base is you define it, you model it, you shape it, you reinforce it. So you define the skill in terms that they can understand why it exists. Why does this skill exist? What does this do in the big picture? You model it, you show it to them done correctly. You shape it, which means you're molding the behavior through repetitions and feedback. And then you reinforce anything that's closer to the desired end product. And so that's a constant process of define, model, shape, and reinforce. Well, you can teach integrity the same way, and you can teach selflessness the same way. You can teach mental toughness or teachable spirit exactly the same way, so that you're defining it and why it's important to the team. You model it, you show it being done correctly. You shape it, which means you're constantly in a molding mode with your athletes. That was better than the previous time. That was a better reaction than the last time. You've still got growth to go. Okay, and you're reinforcing while you're shaping that kind of stuff. One of the booklets we wrote was Life Lessons, and it's a presentation we give, life lessons. I kind of identified 10 things that I would hope that every kid, regardless of talent or regardless of level of play, 10 things that you would hope that every kid would learn from the athletic experience. The sport itself doesn't teach character. You can't say to somebody, hey, hang around volleyball for 4 months, you're going to be a better person. Okay, that doesn't happen that way. It happens when coaches intentionally incorporate character development into their own coaching style, into the culture of their team, and into the defined model, shape, and reinforce with the athlete. So, I mean, I'll have people sometimes after this, especially when I first started speaking on this, I'd have people come up to me after a large clinic and say, why do you take the time, 10 minutes or whatever it might be during your practice time to actually define discipline and try to teach discipline or to try to teach selflessness? Why do you do that? And it makes me kind of smile because I'm pretty competitive and I want my team to succeed. And honestly, here's a belief I have. If you put two teams of fairly equal ability on the same playing field, and one is disciplined and one is undisciplined, one is selfish and one is selfless, I can tell you who's going to win. The disciplined team's going to win. One is disciplined, one not disciplined. The disciplined team's going to win if they're anywhere near equal ability. Everything we do in this particular arena is to help our kids be more successful in life and on the scoreboard both. We're not a feel good kind of,
Yeah.
we're not, we are all competitive coaches teaching this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned this word, and this is a word I came across a lot in the research I've done. Intentionality is very important with this, and it's not just, these students that we're working with, they're not going to just automatically necessarily get this. Our culture teaches us to be selfish. A lot of times in our culture, we want to look out for ourselves. We're not always taught early on to look out for other people. So you mentioned here, it takes intentionality with coaching to make sure that maybe it's a reflection component here as well, where when something happens, they're reflecting on it. How could we have handled that a little bit better? I think that might be part of it as well. But you mentioned this, how you specifically work with coaches on being intentional based on your experience as a coach as well. How do you help coaches maybe incorporate that into their coaching strategy, that maybe those that maybe aren't already familiar with that? How do you teach them to not only focus on how do we be successful as a team, but also how do we incorporate these other character aspects into their coaching style as well? What are some strategies you give coaches for that?
One of the best things about coaching is the autonomy. I can do this there's lots of ways to succeed. And I think the biggest key here is to get them to see the benefit to them during the season, how this is going to help during the season, but also how this is going to carry into their kids' lives. One of the stages of coaching, it's another presentation we have on the stages of coaching. One of the stages of coaching is the prove it stage. I got to prove that I'm good at this. I got to prove it to the team. I got to prove it to the community. I got to prove it to the opponents. I got to prove it to the beat writers. I got to prove that I'm good at this. And what validates me as a coach is my record, my win-loss record. That's what indicates that I'm good at this scoreboard. The scoreboard validates me. And that's not a bad stage. I think most of us have gone through that. But the question I ask those coaches is, the crossroads for that stage is when you start thinking about that stage is the athletes that you're working with are growing up and getting married and you're not invited. Okay. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason why kids keep you in their life or they move on without you. And it has to do with the value that you provided them beyond the game and the technical skills itself, I think, that make a difference. Matt, I just finished 2 books called Coaching for Significance. And those 2 books, I think, sum up a whole lot of why we do what we do. And I was going to write it just as kind of a general book about what significance means in coaching. And it's just like you're talking about, just like your podcast, it's purpose driven. And so I had a lot of different ideas. And then I thought what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually pick some coaches. I'm going to actually choose some coaches, 2 of whom we work with, one of whom I've met and know, and one who I didn't know, but I knew her long-term assistant. That was Pat Summitt, the great tennis women's basketball coach. And along with her in one volume of it is the coach Dick Vermeil, who coached in college and coached in the NFL. And then the 2 that we've worked with for a long period of time is Tim Corbin, the Vanderbilt baseball coach, and Heather Tarr, the University of Washington softball coach, who are both coaches of significance. They make a difference in kids' lives, huge differences. And then So I interviewed all them. I didn't, Pat Summits passed away, so I interviewed her long-term assistant that I know, who actually is a good friend of Rob's. And that was really great. But, then I thought, you know what? If those people are humble, you're not going to really get as much out of those people for why they win, what sets them apart, describe your leadership style. They're humble and they don't really want to talk about themselves. So I made a total switch in the direction I came from. And I said, I'd like to interview your players. They can be current or past. And wow, that was enlightening. To interview people who played for those people and ask those same questions, you get a lot more insightful information and a lot more transparency because they're not thinking, oh gosh, I don't want to come across as, more important than I am. But the players, they don't hold back.
Yeah.
And so that was an amazing thing. None of Pat Summit's players could get through the interview, Matt, without getting emotional. And she was a tough cookie, as you know. I mean, she was a demanding coach, but there was a purposeful love and relationship there that allowed her to be that way. Each coach was different in some ways, but there are some similarities. But the biggest similarity was the intention with which they did everything, every single aspect of that profession.
Yeah, and it goes back to this leadership. And one of the questions I had asked, we've already touched on that a little bit, is it's not always about how can we win more games. It's all that other stuff. Like you mentioned, are they going to be invited to the wedding after, the player's no longer with that coach? That goes back to all these different other things that the coach is teaching them. Could be mentors as well that are teaching them these things. That's the things that the players seem to remember. Did they care about me as a person, not just as a player? That's something that's really kind of important. And it's funny you mentioned that you interviewed the players, because season 3 of the Playing with a Purpose podcast is going to be where I interview athletes for that whole season. So the first 2 seasons will be interviewing individuals, coaches and people like you and Rob. And then season 3 is going to be dedicated to just student athletes. And I think I'm really excited about it. And after hearing you talk about it, I think it's going to be, even more than I had thought. So I think that's going to be a really good season to do that. Like you said, players don't always have filters, as much as other adults would. So they're going to tell you how it is. And I'm really excited about that. And
some hilarious stories, but there are some real emotional moments interviewing just about everybody I interviewed for all 4 coaches. 2 of the people that Dick Vermeil had me interview, and he gave me a list of people and set up the contacts and all that stuff. It was really fun talking to, the Trent Greens and Kurt Warners and those kind of people. But there are 2 guys that Coach Vermeil set me up with who played for him at, I think it was Hillsborough High School in California when he was 22 and they were 17 or 18 years old. Okay, now think about that. That was 60 years earlier. Those guys were 78 years old. They could go back and they could say word for word what he had said in pre-games. Exactly the sequence he used to teach 3rd and goal. The 2 or 3 plays they ran at 3rd and goal. They went back and could say in their only loss in the 2 seasons exactly what he said when he got on the bus that made them all cry. It was unbelievable watching and thinking about these guys going back 60 years in time and being able to still have. They said they can't call him anything but coach. And they still get together all the time. I think there were like 8 players from that high school team that were at his Hall of Fame induction.
Yeah.
I mean, how good is that?
That's pretty amazing. Yeah.
That doesn't happen by accident, Matt.
Yeah.
That's not an accident.
Right.
And one of the things we say is excellence is never an accident. It's always by design. That has to do with culture. It has to do with relationships. It has to do with success on the scoreboard.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I wanted to mention too before we're done today too, is one of the questions was about how do you make this long term? A lot of times you think, well, the coach has a player for 4 years, maybe, if you're in college, or maybe 5, maybe you don't always think about, we need to leave an impact more than just the 4 years you have them. Is there strategies maybe that you have learned, and, every person's going to be different, every coaching style is different, but is there a strategy maybe to help maybe these character qualities you're trying to teach last beyond just the time you have with them? I know a lot of that has to go back to purpose and maybe being intentional about different situations you're in and teaching them, reflecting on it, is there things that you tell coaches how you can make a lasting impact on your athletes, not just the 4 years that you have them?
I think there's a lot of the stuff that we do that touches on that, Matt. I think there's a lot of almost everything we speak on or write about comes back to that. Comes, and that's not really the reason for it, but by doing these things, that will be the result. I think maybe the most important thing I've written is a small booklet called The Impact of Trust. What allows an adolescent or a young person to trust an adult, and in this case, what allows an athlete to trust a coach? And again, I went back to athletes. I mean, I had a bunch of information I was going to use to write it, and I think it was really good. And then I did something really smart. I called the local high school athletic director who we have done some stuff with, and I said, he has a captain's council. And I went into this, I think there were about 25 or 30 high school leadership students in there from all their different teams. And I had them write out the questions were, and then I had them write their answers. Have you ever had a coach you trusted? If so, why? Why did you trust them? And what difference did that trust make in your performance? And then I flipped the question and said, have you ever had a coach that you distrusted? If so, why did you distrust them? And what difference did the distrust make in your performance? And their answers just blew me out of the water. I mean, it was like, oh my gosh, it validated the stuff that I was thinking that I was going to write about anyway, but they said it in much clearer ways, as kids do. Just boom, they're right at the heart of stuff. And so I came home from that and read those, and I thought, oh my goodness. And so I started emailing college athletic director friends around the country that we've worked with and said, hey, would you mind asking your athletes these questions? And I got back thousands of responses, but it came down to the thing that makes a difference and trust is strong. It's not soft. Trust is real, especially in a competitive environment. Trust is real. Trust allows you to win. It allows you to win. It allows you to win the score, but it allows you to win in kids' lives and allows those kids to stay in your life. But it came down to these things. It came down to first of all, you're trusted because you know what you're doing. You know how to coach. You know how to build a team. You know how to build a culture. You know how to teach your sport. So, that's one thing. The next thing is, and there's a whole lot more to this, of course, but the next thing that kept coming up was that you personally care. You can have as much knowledge and technical knowledge and ability to teach it as possible and really understand the profession. But unless you care about your kids, you can win every game and it's still going to make any difference. And the last thing that comes to light is their personal character. So those three things are competence, their caring, and their character. And the character of the coach makes a huge difference. And character is the thing that it takes the longest to really know when you're trying to get to know somebody, but it's the one you can lose the quickest. Oh my goodness, can you lose, one slip of integrity can really cost, and it's really difficult to reestablish that trust once it's been lost. So I think if coaches understand what it takes for the athletes to trust them and everything we do is application based. Everything we do, coaches or athletes or whoever it's written for should be able to say, I can take that right now and I can go apply it with that youngster. I can take that right now and I can put that into my coaching style. I can take that knowledge and I can use it to develop our team culture. So everything needs to be application based. Coaches are application people. They're not philosophical. So I can't go in there. We don't go in and try to talk philosophical. I'm not philosophical. It's application is what is the key.
Well, Bruce, I really appreciate you coming on. There's a lot more we could probably talk about. Is there anything else that maybe comes to your mind as far as just some things maybe we didn't touch on that you really wanted to, as far as some of the things that you do with proactive coaching? Any success stories that you'd like to share, some things that really worked well with that, or anything else that you'd like to share?
I love, and I think all coaches do, how many kids stay in your life. That's one of the greatest gifts that coaches get. It's the coach's greatest legacy is the athletes that stay in your life. And one of the things I've learned, Matt, is the kids that stay in your life are usually the ones who have taken the lessons that you've taught them and they're applying in their own life and they're teaching to their own children and they're applying the same concepts to their job and to their family and all those kind of things. So they're taking part of what they've learned with you and they're applying in their own life. And that's the greatest paycheck any coach will ever have, Going back to those 78-year-old guys that played for Vermeil, this one guy made this statement about how important Coach Vermeil was 60 years ago and still remains. And he said, to this day, I would rather disappear than disappoint Coach Vermeil. Difference maker, life changer, coach of significance, and done with intention.
Probably what every coach would strive for. You know, if you really asked them, that's what they want. It's not always easy to achieve like Dick Vermeil did, but that's probably what every coach would tell you they want. They want to not only have success on the court, but they want to make an impact on their players so they can go out and do great things as well. Again, Bruce, I really appreciate your time today. I know you're a very busy guy, so busy with not only your work with Proactive Coaching, but your grandkids. And I will have some information in the show notes about Bruce, as well as the different ways that you can find his work as far as his books, his Facebook page for Proactive Coaching. That'll be in the show notes if you're interested in that. Bruce, I really appreciate the time today.
Matt, it's always fun to be on these podcasts, especially ones that are making a difference like yours. So I appreciate you, and it's an honor to be with you.
All right, that'll wrap up our show for today. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Playing with a Purpose podcast. Special thanks again to Bruce Brown for being my guest this week. Be sure to listen to this episode and future episodes on Spotify or anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also catch the Playing with a Purpose podcast on the Freed-Hardeman Athletics Champions of Character website at gofhulions.com/champions of character and on the NAIA Champions of Character website at naia.org/champions of character. Join me for our next episode as I talk with the host of the Impactful Coaching Podcast, Mr. Rob Ramsire, on the topic of team unity and coaching. And remember, winning isn't just about the scoreboard, it's about the character we build along the way. We'll see you next time on the Playing with a Purpose podcast.